Your Excellency, I'm so sorry to have to disturb you. Will you ever forgive me?
After I leave here tonight, will you ever forgive me?
Welcome to the Marx Brothers Council Podcast, episode 94, The British Isles. I'm Matthew Coniam, and I've just turned 53 years old. Hope you have too. As ever, producer Bob Gassell is producing, and co-hosting is co-host Noah Diamond.
Happy to be 53, Matthew.
The Marx Brothers, Their World of Comedy, first published in 1966, was a trailblazer, the first major critical book to analyse their films in detail and put them in serious critical and historical perspective. Perhaps more surprisingly, it has also proved to be a book for the ages, still without question, one of the relatively small number of Marx studies no self-respecting fan can afford to be without. Often reprinted and substantially revised in 1992 as the complete films of the Marx Brothers, it is as entertaining, informative, and stimulating a read today as it was when it first appeared. And we're delighted to welcome to the podcast the author of that book, Mr. Allen Eyles. Hello, Alan.
Hi there. Well, gentlemen, question mark, of course. What do you want to know?
Well, you've written huge numbers of books on a wide variety of cinematic topics, ranging from John Wayne, Humphrey Bogart, Rex Harrison, to old cinemas, westerns, The Wizard of Oz, and a book that was very much a Bible of my early years, The Complete Story of Hammer films. But amidst all this profusion, the Marx Brothers are the only vintage comedians that you appear to have devoted book-length analysis to. So can we conclude from that you consider them to be a cut above their peers, and if so, why?
No, I wouldn't quite say that. I had a great fondness for Will Hay, for example, a British comedian, and I wanted to do a book on his work, but no publisher would accept it. It wasn't considered to have any international appeal. And I became a great fan of Preston Sturges when the National Film Theatre here in England had a season of his films. It was actually quite poorly attended, but those of us who were there, we went to everything. It was just a remarkable revelation, as indeed stumbling across the Marx Brothers earlier had been. And yes, I mean, other great favourites, well, a lot of Woody Allen, of course, particularly Take the Money and Run, Tex Avery.
Yeah.
The BBC used to specialise in showing his cartoons in batches, and they were wonderful to have, yeah. And of course, I think they carried on some of the same spirit as the Marx Brothers.
Well, you touched there on your first encounter with them. We always ask our guests if they can remember when they first saw the Marx Brothers, and if so, how instant an effect it did or didn't have on them. And the responses we've received have run the gamut from incredibly precise recollections of the date and the time to others who are genuinely unable to remember, who couldn't remember a time when they weren't part of their lives. Do you remember when you first encountered them and what effect they had?
I can remember it very, very precisely because it was in April 1952 when I just turned 11, and it was towards the end of the Easter school break, a 3-week break, and I was hanging around the house not knowing what to do with myself, and my mother said, "Oh, why don't you go to the pictures? I'll give you the money." And at that point, I hardly ever went to the pictures. I think the previous film I'd seen was probably about 3 months beforehand. So I looked in the paper. I lived at that time between Balham and Tooting Bec in South London. That's London, England, of course. And I think there were 5 cinemas in Tooting and 3 in Balham, although three in Balham tended to show the same films as some of those in Tooting. And there are a couple of repertory cinemas in Tooting, part of a circuit called the Classic Circuit. One was called the Classic at Tooting, the other was the Vogue at Tooting Broadway. And I went to the Vogue, which I don't know what it was showing. It was a western of some sort, but made no great lasting impression on me. But what did make an impression on me was what we call the trailers. I think they're called coming attractions in America. And the following Sunday for 4 days, they had Monkey Business showing, and the trailer for that looked very enticing. And then Thursday for 3 days, they had a John Ford Western called Three Godfathers in glorious Technicolor with John Wayne. And I went to both of those, and that showed the seed of a film addiction, which I still haven't shaken off. And it led me to pursue the films of the Marx Brothers and the films of John Wayne whenever they cropped up within relatively easy reach in South London. Of course, John Wayne was easier to do because it had so many more films around, and they were always being revived. The Marx Brothers, you had to wait for a bit, and it probably took me 4 or 5 years to catch up with all the films, other than the Coconuts, which had completely disappeared, and possibly Room Service, but that was turned up on television when the BBC bought the RKO library, the BBC television here. And that was quite a drawn-out job. And in between, I saw the films again and again when they turned up, but not in any proper chronological order. So it was a bit all over the place.
Interesting again to have another first experience at the age of about 11. That really does seem to be the optimum age. I first saw them at 10 on television. Monkey Business was my first one, and it's amazing how many people say, "Oh yes, I was about 11."
Yeah, interesting that. The big difference is you saw it on television. Presumably, was you by yourself or with your family? Or
for that one, I was by myself. Yes, the others I watched with my father.
Yeah. Because I watched them with really appreciative audiences.
Which must make such a difference, I think.
Well, it did for me. I remember that some of the classics of Baker Street, Notting Hill Gate and Chelsea, and the one at Tooting, they always got very good audiences for the Marx Brothers. The one at Croydon did, which was in reach of me as well. They were the right thing to see anyway. I mean, they were being appreciated by people and roaring with laughter, and that was great, yeah.
So how did being a film lover and a film fan segue into writing about films?
Well, I went to university, and while I was there, I got heavily involved in student journalism and, writing film reviews. I became a features editor and reviews editor for the Pan-London University newspaper called Senate. And when I left, I sent a lot of my clippings of the work I'd written to a middlebrow magazine called Films and Filming, which was a monthly magazine, and got accepted onto their team of reviewers and writers. And that got me sort of started, although the money I earned was nowhere near enough to suggest I had a career anywhere there. I was actually teaching at the time. And one of the series that the Films and Filming had was called Great Films of the Century, which was based on films that were available on 16mm, mainly to film societies, but all kinds of other institutions and so on. And I did a couple of films for them, The Maltese Falcon and A Night at the Opera. And one of the other reviewers I become friendly with, a man called Peter Cowie, had just inherited his father's publishing company and reinvented it because it had been producing yearbooks on antiques and on farming, and his interest was film, like mine. So he started to do a film yearbook called International Film Guide, which became the backbone of this company called the Tentervie Press. Tentervie apparently being a Scottish hunting cry, in case you were wondering. And one day after a press show, I remember we were walking up Haymarket, at the top of Haymarket. We were having a general chat about things, and he produced a book of his own on the films of Orson Welles. And he said, "I'm starting this series of film books." Remembering my piece on A Night at the Opera in Films and Filming, he said, "Why don't you write a book about the Marx Brothers?" And of course I said yes without really thinking. So that probably reduced the amount of money he offered me immediately. He knew he had me hooked. But that all went through. It had to be done in quite a hurry, really. And it was done for the first printing. I got £110 for. And everything after that was paid pro rata. So although there were many reprints and sub-licensing of the book, it was always sort of based on that low starting point. Never mind.
You were really the first person to write a book that surveyed the films of the Marx Brothers. Not quite the first book about them, but the first book that said, Chapter 1, Coconuts. And really quite a pioneering volume in that way. the very first sentence in the book, you say they're the most heroic of all the screen comedians. It seems like a profoundly true statement, and I wonder if you would talk about that a little bit. Some of the ways in which the Marx Brothers are more heroic than many of their peers.
Well, I felt that they really owned the early films that they made. They couldn't have been made without them. Whereas a lot of other comedy teams, they have complex plots and situations and so on, and they could be replaced by other similar comedians. But the Marx Brothers brought these through their training in vaudeville or music hall, as we'd say here. They brought all these tricks with them, and of course, they were all over the place as far as sticking to their marks were concerned. They didn't. They sort of owned these films and they made them. And that's actually why, when we were giving my book a title, I called it Their World, the Marx Brothers, Their World of Comedy, to try and emphasize that they were really auteurs. They were the directors of their films in many ways, because they did what they wanted to do. And that's surely heroic, isn't it?
It's interesting because that's a point that I've often made myself, and rereading your book this week, I frequently found myself uneasily feeling like a plagiarist because I'd forgotten just how many of my own positions on these films and my take on them generally is already there in yours and was likely influenced by yours. So I think it's fair to say that this is something you had obviously devoted a lot of thought to. One tends to expect early books on subjects that are much written about thereafter to be comparatively analysis light, but yours sort of goes right to the marrow, straight out of the gate.
Well, there was a big consideration when I wrote the book. At that time, you couldn't just see the films whenever you wanted to. You had to wait for them to turn up somewhere and go to that screening. So I think when you were writing a book at that time, you were trying to provide a little bit of a reference book to what was in the individual films. Because people would say to me, what was the film that such and such happened in? Which film had the speakeasy sequence or whatever. And this book was really to provide a kind of answer to that. I mean, it wasn't obviously an encyclopedia because it wasn't organized in that way. But I did try to be as accurate as possibly could, because I had audio soundtracks from recording them when they turned up on television. And
I used to do that as well.
I tried to comment on them as well. But I think my later version, I had an opportunity we can go into later of how I came to do that, which is most unexpected, contains my later thoughts on it, on the Marx Brothers team. So do you distinguish between the two at all, or you're referring to my original edition, are you, at the moment?
I'm referring to the original at the moment, but the second one was actually the one that I bought first. So I kind of read them in the wrong order.
A bit like the way I saw the Marx Brothers films.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. But I mean, I'm just constantly struck by things in here that one doesn't tend to read too often, but which I completely agreed with, like that the Coconuts is one of their best, that the relative status of their last three MGM films is, Circus poor but with some good scenes, Go West just plain poor, and The Big Store a small but definite improvement. These are still opinions that can ruffle the feathers of some fans, and I was just stunned to see it there in 1966. And there, I mean, I'm not going to bore you by reading your own book to you, but there are so many observations in it that ring true for me. Monkey Business, you say, has a take it or leave it air, which is I think absolutely right. And of A Night at the Opera, you say before this, one did not really have preconceptions in a Marx picture. One sat back not knowing what would happen next. The new formula offers the contradiction of displaying form and logic, two qualities that Marx humor itself scarcely accepts.
Yeah, I like the sound of that. You can read my book to me, I don't mind.
One point that you make as well is concerning the importance of the individuality of the three main brothers, and you say that too many teams have tended to be too alike, and very pleasingly to me, you liken them to Will Hay, Graham Moffat, and Moore Marriott.
Well, they were a trio, of course. You had a similar sort of contrast to the Marx Brothers in that they were all different contrasting styles of humour, with Will Hay, for those who don't know him, being the incompetent person in authority, and Moore Marrett being the old codger, and Graham Moffat being the cheeky youngster, and they had a real not a rapport exactly. They were always rubbing off each other, but it was. I thought those films they made, and I recommend anyone to find them out and to start with Oh, Mr. Porter. I mean, they're comfortable comedies. You like them despite their faults, and they had quite a substantial body of work, about 8 or 9 films. No, do you know Will Hay at all?
Not well. I know from references in your writing and other places, but no,
Yeah,
I'm sadly ignorant about a lot of British comedy.
they're the peak British comedians as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
I had an opportunity to introduce my young son to Oh, Mr. Porter when he was about 7 or 8 years old, because I live in Bath, so I don't know if you're familiar with the Little Theatre Cinema in Bath,
Yes.
but that has been there obviously since the 30s, and apparently the first film they ever showed there was Oh, Mr. Porter. So when they had an anniversary, they showed it again on a Saturday morning, and I took my son to it with I didn't tell him anything about it. I just said we were going to go to the movies, and he absolutely loved it.
Yeah, it's a great film, particularly if you like railways.
Yes, yes.
Filmed on a recently closed railway line, and those films have an authentic atmosphere to them, the settings they have, because the team went through a prison film, Convict 99, a police film, Ask a Policeman, they were Fireman in Where's That Fire? But to all these settings, there was a real love displayed in anchoring them in what seemed like a real setting.
Yeah, and always essentially the same characters with the same relationship. So extremely comparable to the Marxes in that sense.
There's an interesting link actually between Will Hay and the Marx Brothers. Hay was not entirely happy to share the comic limelight with the other two, and at one point he broke away and made a film with Edgar Kennedy called Hey Hey USA. And so you've got this link between the lemonade seller of Duck Soup and a co-starring role with Will Hay, in what is actually a pretty awful film, as I recall.
It's not one of his best, is it? The other thing that I particularly enjoyed reading the first edition of the book again this week is, of course, because it was not only written in Britain, which is pleasant for me, but also because it was written in the 1960s. You compare them not just to Spike Milligan, but specifically to his stage success, Son of Oblomov, which is this hugely important and radically innovative part of his career, but because it was on stage rather than on screen, it's now sadly gone the way of the Marxes on Broadway. But of course, when you were writing the book, it was current.
Yes, I was a great addict to the Goon Show as well, which is a half-an-hour radio show that Spike Milligan wrote, in which he appeared with Peter Sellers and Harry Seacombe. I've hesitated to go back and see if there are recordings of those. There must be, in case don't appeal to me as much as they did then. I'd kind of like to leave it alone and remember how much I enjoyed those half-an-hour radio shows back in the 1950s.
Yeah, I find that they get very, very repetitive if you listen to a lot of them in one go. But if you ration them, I think you'd find they still work. Yeah. Before we come on to the second edition of your book and the changes that you made to it, I want to touch on what I think is the thing that the book is most famous for now, at least among the really hardcore devotees, and that is the detailed description of material in horse feathers that now appears to have been permanently lost. The recent search for complete materials that finally yielded an uncut print of animal crackers, for instance, still sadly came up blank on horse feathers. And this is the conclusion to the scene in Thelma Todd's boudoir and the extra material with Harpo, the dog catcher, and his portable lampposts. Can you tell me just a little bit more of the background about how you came to see and record that material. So it was just in the prints that were showing in Britain in the 50s. Is that right?
Yes, it was. And they may well have been old nitrate prints. They wouldn't have been kept much longer. They would have been junked probably quite soon after. Although cinemas like the classic circuit had a license to show nitrate films under certain conditions, so they did carry on showing them. I mean, at the time, I just assumed it was the films it was, and at that time it's rather odd. My interest in the Marx Brothers possibly boosted a bit by the fact that I found a couple of other fellow Marx Brothers addicts, a couple of years older than me, at the school I went to, namely people called David Parlett and Paul Chown, and I used to pass on to them when the Marx Brothers films were showing and that kind of thing, and discuss them at times. I also used to play cards a lot with David because he was inventing card games even then. That's what he's done, apart from being a games historian as well. And he actually made quite a detailed record of the film from its showing, I believe, at what's called the Pullman Cinema in Brixton. It's still there, called the Ritzy these days. And I mean, I saw it there and I made my own notes and so on. So I think between us, and I think David, because he'd actually done it very thoroughly, was a solid reference point for this. We had this scene jotted down for the benefit of history, really.
Right. I think because a lot of us were never sure if you and David Parlett had taken those notes simply because you took notes of everything, or if there was an awareness even at the time that this was rare footage.
No awareness at all. It was just one of those films that was still being shown. Yeah.
Right.
Thinking back, I never really thought I was writing for an American audience, but you couldn't get publishers to take books on British popular films. There was no market for it, and also they wanted to sell the rights internationally, so they wanted subjects that had world appeal. Although it's interesting how much the Marx Brothers may have been internationally popular because of the language problems of subtitling people like Groucho and Chico, and I don't know, but the other thing was, of course, living in Britain in those days, American cinema is so exotically different that we were very much more attracted to that than the average run of British films, which tend to be more limited in their budgets and set it often in class attitudes and so on. And I always found Westerns and American comedies much more invigorating and more interesting to see. But I didn't really realize that the book had even been much seen in America until I got letters coming to me at the Tantivy Press, because I actually joined the company after doing the Marx Brothers book and worked there as an editor on the British and Hollywood books they did. And Peter Cowie, who ran the company, specialised in the foreign language films, particularly Swedish and Ingmar Bergman. Yes, I was getting these letters come in, and most of them are very complimentary, but some of them tended to sort of say, well, can I just tell you didn't understand this, or you got that bit of slang or whatever. And of course, that was one of the drawbacks in doing it, that you were writing from this country, and you didn't. I do have books on American slang, but they weren't always up to date. I'm not sure I had them at the time I wrote the book, but it was interesting to have that sort of feedback and realise it had actually gone out in America. I think at one point I was quite pleased when Warner Brothers bought it, because they had a paperback division, and they bought the right to doing a slim paperback edition of the book. I think on one occasion I had a chance to revise that book, but otherwise it was just always being reprinted from the way it already was.
Some of this goes to the fact that when you wrote your first book, it was all newly fallen snow. I mean, you had no footsteps to walk in. I guess Groucho's book and Harpo's book and Kyle Crichton's book were already out. But when your book was published, there were not a lot of places to go for like a taste of the films on paper, just to be reminded of what's in the films.
course, the Marx Brothers always had a good reputation in Britain. Back in the 1930s, the Everyman at Hampstead, which is, I think, one of the world's first important repertory cinemas, was showing Marx Brothers seasons. So they're always a sort of respectable subject in the way that most other comedians weren't. Mae West and W.C. Fields had a similar following. And of course, they were associated with Paramount, which is such a rich studio in the 1930s, as far as I'm concerned, anyway.
You put those three together, actually, in the book, don't you? Westfields and the Marxes, and you say that they share cynicism, worldliness, and lack of heart.
I like the sound of that.
That's good, isn't it? Yeah, that's nicely written.
I didn't have any resources to do any proper research other than I think it was Kevin Brown who gave me the address of George Folsey, who'd photographed the first two films at Astoria. I sent him a letter off, and he sent me a long handwritten reply, which I quote in the book. I think particularly when he shot extra scenes on the day at the races without being credited at MGM. So that was a little bit of research that I could do, but things like their dates of birth and so on, which I believe are contentious, I just took from the Motion Picture Almanac or some reference book that ought to be reliable. I didn't know where I could really, at that time, on the situation I was in this country, do anything much more to check on that kind of information. So I hope I can be forgiven for any errors of that sort.
Yeah, we forgive you. We forgive you.
So let's move on to the complete films then, which came out some 25 or so years after the first edition of their World in Comedy. How did you come to revisit the book so much later?
Well, I knew somebody in America called Alvin Merrill, who was an established sort of film historian, and he'd written books for the Citadel Press, which I think for 30 years or so have been churning out these books. Usually, it started off being called the Films of, but at that point they'd suddenly decided it was going to be the Complete Films of. So that was imposed on me when I came to do the book. But Alvin Merrill was an editor there. They were at Secaucus, New Jersey, and he wanted me to go out and meet the head of the company, obviously hoping that we could come up with a book I could do. So I looked at the list of all the books that they published, and it was very hard to find anyone left to do, apart from one glaring exception, which was Burt Lancaster, whose work I quite liked, particularly his role as a producer in Hollywood, as an independent producer in the 1950s. But most of his films I thoroughly enjoyed, and I enjoyed putting together a reference book on that. But for some reason, he'd upset somebody in the Citadel Press, and they refused absolutely to have a book on him.
Oh. So
I was looking around, and there was they'd done books on Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff and Peter Lorre, and I thought maybe they'd take Claude Rains, who I had a great admiration for. And I tried that out when I met this guy who was head of the company, and he wouldn't do that because it was too specialised, he thought. So we were struggling with to find anyone that might interest me that they would accept. And then he said to me, "Oh, didn't you write a book on the Marx Brothers once?" And I owned up to that. And he said, "Do you own the rights?" And I said, "No, but I could get them." So he said, "Well, we've never done a book on the Marx Brothers. Why don't you do one?" And half of me thought, well, hang on, somebody else should do this, get a fresh perspective on them. The other half thought it'd be nice to go over all this material again and go back to it after 25 years or so and have another go at it. You don't often get a chance to revise these things properly. And so I got on with it. And I think I was aware at that time of the Fredonia Gazette, because some copies of that, not by any means a complete run, some copies were in the British Film Institute's library in London. And I got a lot of help there from Paul, is it Weslowski or something?
Weslowski, yeah.
Yes, who was very cooperative. And also my friend at Citadel added a lot of pictures to it. So it ended up, I thought, being quite a good book. But that represented really my rethinking on it.
So can you remember, was there anything that you recall in particular that you were keen to change, or was it just simply a case of adding new material and sort of bringing it up to date?
I don't think my position on the way their career had gone changed very much. I think possibly by then my view on Night at the Opera had hardened a bit, so I didn't like it as much as I had, because seeing it again and again, I began to feel it was a bit too pat, if you know what I mean, a bit too pre-planned and so on. And they needed that freedom to break out of any particular formula that was being devised for them. So, but I can understand. I mean, Duck Soup, I don't think was a box office success. The mood was changing with the production code being applied and things of that sort. So I think comedy became a lot safer. Perhaps they didn't fight hard enough against that. But of course, they were getting on a bit then, perhaps, and they wanted to perhaps do what they felt would be most popular rather than what would be best for their comic personas, as have been established by the early films. I certainly think these days, probably my favourite Marx Brothers films become Monkey Business, particularly the first 2/3 on the ocean liner. I mean, I love Animal Crackers and I like Coconuts, and they're wonderful records of stage productions, and that's what they are. And this showed really what the Marx Brothers could do when they could range over that whole ocean liner, which, despite the fact you don't see many passengers, you don't see the big areas like the lounges and so on. It's got quite a convincing atmosphere of being on an ocean liner, I think, anyway. And it's got so many great scenes that seem to belong more to cinema than to the stage.
You know, you make a point about Monkey Business that I don't think anyone else has made, or at least a connection. Many people have wondered how much S.J. Perelman had to do with the screenplay, and many have noticed that Monkey Business follows a different formula than their other films. And on their next film, Horse Feathers, they're sort of back to the formula of Animal Crackers. But Monkey Business stands alone in numerous ways. But I think you're the only writer to suggest that maybe that's because of Perelman. That the things that make Monkey Business a little different from the other Marx Brothers films are things in common with much of Perelman's prose humor. I think you're the only author to make that connection.
Oh, I certainly was a great fan of S.J. Perelman's writing, and I've got a volume still. Is it the most of S.J. Perelman, the best of S.J.? Huge volume, yeah. And other books like Acres and Pains and so on. I got those stuck here. Well, to be honest, I haven't really looked at them for many years.
Yes, there's an interesting quote along those lines in the first book. You say, "Horse Feathers is more in the spirit of the first two Marx films by Kaufman and Riskind, more of a vehicle, more solidly and conventionally constructed, as though Kalmar and Ruby, with their vaudeville background, approached the script with audience satisfaction first in their minds, while Johnston and Perelman, principally journalists, tended to write more for themselves."
Well,
that's it.
I don't know. I'm right. It's just an idea I'm putting forward.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. Speaking as somebody very much like myself and Noah, and I think many people who are listening, who saw the Marx Brothers films at least after their first one, not because they chanced upon them, but because they were very, very actively seeking them out. Can you remember, I wonder, which one was the last one that you caught up with, and was it a long time after the others?
Oh, yes, definitely. The Coconuts was the most difficult one. For a long time, I wondered if it even existed. I started writing a column on films on television for Films and Filming, because in those days you didn't know what was going to be showing on the three channels we had, BBC One and Two, and ITV, the commercial channel in Britain, until the magazines came out the previous week. And that was always very annoying when you wanted to see a film, but you arranged to do something else on that particular evening.
Oh, yes.
So I devised this idea of running this column, and I checked up with the people at the BBC, and they were quite happy to bypass the normal press office route and just feed me the information they had. to create this page. They wanted the films to get more recognition, and they just bought this huge package of pre-1948 Paramounts from MCA to show, called under the title "The Vintage Years of Hollywood." And when this came in, I was writing this column, and I checked with them on the films they had, and they said, "Oh, we bought all the 5 Marx Brothers Paramount films, but we're not going to show the Coconuts." I said, "You've got the Coconuts? You're not going to show it?" And they said, "Well, the problem with it is you can't understand the lyrics of the Irving Berlin numbers, and their fans will be most upset by this, so we can't show it." Oddly enough, it was a 16mm print, which made me wonder if it only survived on 16mm, although subsequently 35mm prints have turned up. I was a bit disconcerted by this, but then the head of the BBC said something quite extraordinary to me, as far as I'm concerned, a man called Gunnar Rugheimer. He said, "We can't show it, and we're going to return it and get another film in its place, but do you want to borrow it in the meantime?" So I went across the offices at Shepherd's Bush Green, because I'd done this, talked to him on the phone, and emerged with this tin of film. I remember how elated I felt crossing Shepherd's Bush Green to the Underground, carrying the Coconuts, which, as far as I know, hadn't been seen in this country for 20 years or more. And I had friends at a film society called the Grasshopper Club, which had a screening room in Endell Street in the middle of London. Jim Kearley and Peter Levy, and they were very anxious to see it as well, and they ran it straight away, just took it straight across, and we had a look at it. And of course I audio recorded the soundtrack, which is all I could do at the time. I think just the 3 of us were there, maybe 1 or 2 others I'd invited in, but there we were. Sort of, you're seeing this film, probably the first time it's been seen in this country, although obviously the BBC had seen it to find out that the lyrics were no longer intelligible on the film. The one thing, Irving Berlin didn't get a hit number out of anyway, so a very minor film in his canon, but a very major one in the Marx Brothers canon. It was very rewarding, despite the state of the print.
That's incredible, because the first time that I saw the Coconuts was the first time that it was shown on British television, which was in 1984 on Channel 4. So I'm only now learning that the BBC had it long before and didn't bother to show it. That's incredible.
In 1965, yeah.
Wow.
It showed the others, but not this one. But then, of course, what was interesting, the BBC kept showing these films over and over again, so whole new generations of people were being introduced to the Marx Brothers. And then this mantle passed to Channel 4 when it started. And it relied very heavily on films in its early period. And it picked up all these films. And as you say, it was quite happy to show the Coconuts. And one obviously then was able to, I think, record it on videotape as well.
Yeah, it was the first one that I recorded on videotape. The previous Christmas, the BBC Two had shown 5 of them, but I was only able to audio record them. So it was sometime between then and the Coconuts the following year that we got our first video recorder. And the Coconuts was the first one I videotaped on Channel 4.
So you were able to really get those Irving Berlin lyrics.
Yes.
I must have a go at that sometime in my old age. But no, I don't really care too much, I'm afraid.
Just one last observation that I wanted to make about the book. In the first edition, there's a chapter at the end called Trends and Traditions, which I think contains some of the book's best writing. And in it, you make a point which I think is really important that we have touched on already. You note a lot of similar material in the work of Jacques Tati and Wheeler and Woolsey and several others. But you make the point, which is very penetrating for its time, I think, that with the Marxes, the material is only half of the show. And you say the comedians are still different when the comedy itself is not. And I think if there's one thing that many of us would point to with the Marx Brothers and say, yeah, that is why they're different. These other guys are all great, but that's why they're different. I think it would be that. Do you agree, Nat?
Yeah.
You said also, obviously, of some of the Buster Keaton and Laurel and Hardy and so on, they had their own inimitable style. Mind you, there've been some good imitators of the Marx Brothers in the years since. And you had something to do with that, have you know, or
Oh,
not?
I've
You
done a
have,
little
haven't
bit
you?
of that,
Yes.
yes, and others have successfully
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
But it's it's doing a competent copy of a truly original creative force.
Groucho came to England to make a series based on You Bet Your Life. It was just called Groucho in this country and was deemed unsuccessful. I don't know how long it lasted. I don't actually remember seeing it for some reason. But as part of that, Groucho also made a personal appearance at the National Film Theatre, which is another place that regularly revived the films. And I remember writing the notes for at least, I think, two times. They did all 13 films. So there were these opportunities, if you lived in London, to see the Marx Brothers work in the proper order. So that was always another way in which the Marx Brothers kept going, and new generations were finding them. But I just really worry now about if anyone's picking up on them now, who's years old, because you can always pursue your own interests, and you're not going to necessarily be directed towards them, even, are you? There's so much to choose from in a way. The number of films you've got to choose from is tripled or quadrupled or something. So they become a smaller part of the whole pile.
And also, I think because there's such easy access now to almost anything that's worth seeing, instant easy access, I think people tend to forget not only the frustrations but also the thrill of having to hunt these things down. You mentioned the NFT there. That was where I first saw all of them on the big screen in one of those seasons. Probably one of the ones that you helped to program. That would have been in the early 1990s, I think. Before that, the only ones I'd seen at the cinema was a double bill of opera and races, and that was at the Everyman in Hampstead. And I think there's something very, very nice about having your memories of seeing these films intertwined with the experience of kind of hunting for them.
I think seeing them in the cinema, although it had its drawbacks. I remember the first time I saw Animal Crackers, if I can bore you a bit longer. The first time I saw Animal Crackers, it was shown on a wide screen. And this was amusing in a way, because when it came to the sequence in which Groucho and Chico talk about building the house next door with the plans they're looking at on the table and so on, the projectionist was constantly having to rack down from having racked up their heads, periodically, because a long take, periodically racked down to show what they were talking about on the table. So that was quite a bizarre way of seeing Animal Crackers. But I was so excited about it. I insisted my parents had to go and see it the next day. So they went. When they came back, they didn't say a word. But this does make me wonder whether there is much of a female audience appreciation of the Marx Brothers, because I certainly find it difficult to get women enthused about them.
That was always the feeling,
a big
wasn't
barrier
it?
there as well.
Yeah. That Thalberg was specifically trying to address that issue. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I do know lots of women who do like them, but I don't know. What do you think now?
There certainly has been some truth to that, and it's been pointed out so often over the years. I think right now, at least in my experience, I don't see it as much, and many of the most ardent Marx Brothers fans I know are women. So I think maybe along with other aspects of the battle of the sexes, this one has diluted over the years to the point where it's not so relevant. But yeah, that certainly has been historically true, that their comedy has had more appeal to the male audience. I'm glad to say that seems less true now, just because the more people love them, the better. I also, although surely they don't have as much currency as they used to among young people, I always find it heartening how much young people still respond to them when exposed to them. I mean, if you show Monkey Business to a room full of children, they get a big kick out of it. And so it's on us to make sure young people still know who they were.
I mean, the Punch and Judy scene should go down extremely well with a young audience even now, shouldn't it?
Yeah, and I think Harpo in general is still enchantment to a child and to an adult.
But there's just so much to see these days, isn't there? And so much of it is presented in extended into 8 hours worth of material when you think you only really need 3 or 4 hours at the most. And how do I commit myself to that amount of time? In fact, a lot of these longer series, I tend to watch the first couple of episodes and then skip to the last two and pick up what's happened in between. Just haven't got the time.
Yeah.
Whereas the Marx Brothers, of course, their films are all relatively short. You don't feel you want to lose anything there, do you? Apart from some of the extraneous musical numbers.
They're relatively short, and there are so few of them compared to so many other great comedians. The 13 is such a meager tally that one does feel the need to embrace them all.
I think your book was the first place we learned how much more of Coconuts was shot than was released. That apparently there was an additional 45 minutes or something worth of Coconuts cut from the print before it was released in cinemas.
I dipped into some of your podcasts, and is there now a more complete version of A Night at the Opera with an opening sequence, or is that just...
Frustratingly, it has been found in an archive in Hungary, but nothing has been done as yet to get it seen. But some of it is still missing, but some of it is definitely in this Hungarian print. Yeah, but we're still waiting to clap eyes on it.
And the current release of Animal Crackers is about 2 minutes longer with some found material.
Well, Alan, thank you so much for joining us.
Okay.
This has been absolutely thrilling to speak to you after all these years. It's really feels like kind of putting a full stop on a long delayed conversation. Noah, do you have a Patreon update for us?
Yes, I normally use this time to talk about our postcards, which continue to be sent out every month to our Patreon subscribers at the top 4 levels. The latest is a beautiful design by returning champion Nick Floyd. But I also want to use this time to talk about our upcoming bonus segment. Our next bonus segment will be the one in which we talk about this audio release that has caused so much excitement among Marx Brothers fans lately. This is the record that has been titled Harpo Speaks, the Riverside Symphony Concert, featuring Peter and the Wolf, narrated by Harpo Marx. If you're listening to our show, you have probably already acquired and enjoyed this recording and are wondering when we're going to talk about it. Well, the answer is very soon on our next bonus segment. Our bonus segments are available to all paid Patreon subscribers at all 5 paid levels, and you can get them all. If you're not a Patreon subscriber, sign up right now, and for as little as $3 a month, you could hear all 40-something of our bonus segments. It's like getting a whole hell of a lot more Marx Brothers Council podcast than you ever had before. For as little as $3 a month, what's wrong with us? Are we suckers? We just give it away.
I'm now going to spring something nasty on you. We tend to ask our guests if they would like to choose the song that we play out with. It can be anything at all that in your mind is connected to the Marx Brothers. It can be a Marx Brothers song, or it can be something that has meaning only for you, but you have an absolutely free choice. What would you like our final song to be?
I was going to immediately think of perhaps Lydia the Tattooed Lady, except that's too obvious a choice. Does the Dr. Hackenbush number exist as an audio recording that was cut out of Day at the Races?
It does exist in a couple of different audio versions, isn't it, Noah? You're the Hackenbush expert.
Absolutely. Groucho recorded it in the 50s with the Ken Lane Singers, and he also did it on television a number of times.
That would be my choice then.
Okay, that's what we'll do. And Allen Eyles, once again, thank you very much for joining us.
This is Dr. Hackenbush, the famous medico. You're welcome, Dr. Hackenbush.
If that's the case, I'll go.
Oh, no, you mustn't go.
Who said I mustn't go? The only reason that I came is so that I can go. I'm Dr. Hackenbush. My medical standing's very high. Well, anyways, ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Hackenbush.
He's Dr. Hackenbush.
I'm Dr. Hackenbush. As a matter of fact, to be exact, I'm Dr. Hackenbush.
I'm sure we all would like to hear some facts about your great career.
Although my horn I hate to blow, there's one thing that you ought to know. I'm Dr. Hackenbush, which all my friends will verify. Well, anyways, ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Hackenbush.
He's Dr. Hackenbush.
I'm Dr. Hackenbush. You never would guess, but nevertheless, I'm Dr. Hackenbush. For ailments abdominal, my charge is a nominal. Though I'm great for Ivorate for tonsillectomy. Sick and healthy, poor and wealthy, come direct to me. Oh, God bless you, they yell when I send them home well. But they never, no, they never send a check to me. I've won acclaim for curing ills, both in the north and south. You'll find my name is like my pills in everybody's mouth. I've never lost a case.
He's never lost a case.
I've lost a lot of patients, but I've never lost a case. My diagnosis never fails. I know just what to do. Whenever anybody ails, I'm sympathetic too. My heart within me melts.
His heart within him melts.
No matter what I treat them for, they die from something else. When your nerves start to rock, put your faith in your doc. When you're sick, he will stick to the end. With the possible exception of your mother, a doctor's a man's best friend.
Yes, a doctor's a man's best friend.
A doctor's a man's best friend. Whoa, a doctor's a man's best friend.
A doctor is
A doctor is a man's best friend. Right or wrong, wrong or right, night and day and night. On his call you can always depend. With the possible exception of your mother and your father and your sister and your brother, and your nephews and your nieces and your uncles and your cousins whom you number by the numbers. A doctor's a man's best friend.
The Marx Brothers Council podcast is produced by Bob Cassell. Matthew Conium's books, including the annotated Marx Brothers, the annotated Abbott and Costello, and That's Me, Groucho, are published by McFarland. Noah Diamond's book, Give Me a Thrill, The Story of Alsatias, is published by Beer Manor Media. To leave a comment and for more info about this and all episodes, visit us at MarxBrothersCouncilPodcast.com. For the latest Marx Brothers and podcast news, look for us on Blue Sky and Twitter. And join the fun with the largest and most vibrant Marx community online, a club that will have someone like you as a member. The Marx Brothers Council Facebook group. That's it for now. Swordfish!
No, I got tired of that. I changed it.
Okay, thank you.
This is a pleasure,
Great.
Alan. Thank you so much.
If any problems come, you can come back to me. I've sort of enjoyed it, but I haven't really done very much about the Marx Brothers in the past 20 years, really. Maybe it's time to come back and plunge in again.
Yeah.